movement of Americans into Russia, and what I know to be many interesting stories from that time,
Right.
but a general story about the collapse of the Soviet Union and the new institutions in Russia and what part we Americans played in that, which is not a story very well told, as far as I know, you know.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's nothing that focuses on that solely. I mean, it's of course woven into various things, but most of that is like, and I may have even remarked on that in my email, but it'll be like, you know, the shock therapy and that kind of stuff, and a Harvard professor coming over to advise on whoever that guy was, and you know, on the Yeltsin's campaign and that kind of thing, and you know, but nothing, not about all the people like me, you know.
Right.
And friends I have over there that are still there. I mean, they never, and it's funny because my father was the same way. I mean, he went to France when he was in a Fulbrighter, actually. And then he went over on sabbatical when he was a professor. But, and there are several Americans that like stayed by, like he has American friends in France, right?
Right.
And I always grew up knowing these Americans that lived in France, and it was kind of weird to me, like, you know, they live in America, and they gradually, I remember they gradually became a little detached from the, you know, I mean, they read the newspaper, International Tribune or whatever, but I visited Paris, I remember once, and had, you know, dinner with this guy, and he was asking me these questions about America, kind of like, you came from there, tell me about it. And that was a puzzling thing. And now here I am, I have the same deal with about, well, I guess at this point it's really just two Americans who literally never came back.
Yeah.
From the same period, I worked with them as security guards at the American Embassy in 1993. And then I said, I'm getting the hell out of here.
Right.
And I did come back, of course, but, you know, left in 2004, and they never left, and made pretty good living too. So why would they, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll ask you about them in a minute, but let me just start from the beginning then. Like, how did you get interested in Russia, and why did you go there the first time?
And by the way, when I made some notes, I might just glance to refresh my memory on.
That's fine.
Yeah. But and also, if I talk too long or whatever, you can feel free to say, "Hey, okay, I got enough" or whatever. It's totally up to you. I won't take offense.
No, not at all. Don't worry about that. I mean, this is really a conversation, and it's not. I don't have a set of questions I need to work my way through.
Gotcha.
So I had themes that I wanted you to think about.
Sure.
And I wanted it to be a conversation. So
good.
You know.
Yeah. No. So the reason I got interested in Russia was. Interesting story in and of itself, to me at least, in that in the late 80s, so I graduated from high school in 89, as I was, you know, let's say maturing as, you know, the junior, senior in high school, I was always a little bit out there with my own unique kind of ways. I didn't like to swim with the mainstream, so to speak, in high school. I even felt a little bit of an outsider that even in high school. Tried to.
Where were you in high school?
Natick, Massachusetts.
Yeah. Okay.
Right near Wellesley, Needham, all those places. So I tried to be, I mean, I had fun. I tried to be an average guy, but I was also in these kind of upper level classes like advanced place English and a class I took on international affairs, which was pretty unique to a high school, frankly. And it was largely because the guy was, you know, they happened to have a teacher who loved the subject. It wasn't something that normally you'd see. So senior year, I took a class in international affairs where we talked about perestroika and glasnost, because that was all the thing there. That would have been 88 to 89.
Right.
And at the same time, I took a class, Advanced Placement English, where we were reading Crime and Punishment and Solzhenitsyn. Again, driven by this teacher, just like, hey, I'm not going to read, you know, Huckleberry Finn with you because you have that already.
Right. So
it was the nexus of these two, kind of having Russian politics thrown at me, or Soviet, and then having the literature, the culture at the same time. And it just so happened that I happened to be going off to Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin. Now, I'll tell you why that's important in a second. But before I do that, while I was getting into these two subjects, at first, I kind of got interested in the Cyrillic alphabet, like literally the language, not even the language itself, but the alphabet. I mean, no joke. Like the artist in me kind of just really appreciated the look of it. So my dad from Simmons College in Boston brought home some newspapers, and I would look at these newspapers without even understanding a lick of it. But it looked to me like a Martian language, and I thought that was cool, and I was going to try to learn this language. So it just so happened I was going to Wisconsin without a lick of an idea of what I wanted to pursue as studies. And of course, undergrad, it didn't really matter. But when I got there and realized just how large it was,
Yeah.
one of the biggest universities, and me being, as I said, a little bit of not the type of guy to run around and meet a group of friends very easily, I was going to start taking Russian, and I enjoyed these classes right off the bat that had only about 20 kids in them.
Yeah.
So at first I obviously signed up for Russian to learn the language, but it was confirming that was a good choice. And then I also had this slightly tighter group. And then, I went to Middlebury College in the summer. I went study abroad at MGU, Moscow State University, the last semester of my college experience, of my college period there. It was the last semester.
Which would have been what year?
Oh, sorry, 1993.
Okay.
And so, I think if I had gone for the semester prior, my life could have been totally different. And it's no kidding, because when I went for the last semester, first of all, I wanted to go for a year, but my dad talked me out of it because he was just too cautious. He says, "You don't want to go over there for a year." I wish I had stood firm and insisted on it, because time flies by, and 4 months was over like that. So a friend of mine and I, in the dorms there, we loved it so much, and we were graduating. Again, just like in high school, I have no idea what to do next. So we just said, let's just stay. Now, I did fly back for a couple of months. We didn't literally just stay. That would be kind of insane. But we basically said, I guess more truthfully speaking, let's come back right away and continue this lifestyle, albeit not under the guise of academia or whatever, study, but just try to figure something out. Yeah. So it was really driven more by that sense of, on one hand, just let's do something because we're out of college now and we're stuck, Yeah. I wouldn't be able to tell you even the smallest hint of an idea of what I would have done in America after college. I'm almost frightening to think of being in that position. So it was an escape for me, really, because I knew I could survive over there on $200 a month or something. Right. And I think this was in part of your question, or at least my answer. It wasn't really, a lot of people there, of course, were getting into business and all that. I don't think I ever really had any realistic sense that I'd become like a businessman. If I did, I was talking myself into it, but I never really had that kind of mojo to be in, work for the oil industry or something. Right. I just wasn't that. I wasn't that way. I didn't have it in me. So did you have Russian friends at that point? Groups of Russian friends or not? Well, okay, yes. So in college, from the dorms, we had, I wouldn't say a group of Russian friends, but we had picked up, kind of attached ourselves to a group of mates that, obviously enjoyed the exotica of these Americans there. And we, likewise, language was still pretty so I can't say we had deep conversations, but, enough to kind of hang out and party together, basically, was what we did. Right. The real hook was I had a girlfriend, actually, which, not that you'll find a way to work this into the book, but it may be a one. I won't, but yeah. No, not the girlfriend, how I met her. This is. Oh, okay. I was invited by these college kids who had a lot of friends that were in the local university where they were grooming KGB folks. So, one of the whatever the institute that launches like all these KGB folks. And we were invited to a disco, quote unquote, that they had put together in the Lubyanka itself. And I'm not kidding. The idea of going there now at all but let alone just opening the doors and letting all of these kids in there, including Americans. I walked by a statue of Dzerzhinsky, like a huge thing, like right in the, the whole marble. I mean, you can only imagine the Stalinist entrance there.
Yeah.
The whole place was a disco juxtaposed with all of this crazy Soviet, and there I met this girl. Now, she wasn't connected to the KGB, thank God, but she was actually a sweet person. And so we hung around for like the last 2 months of my study, and she sponsored my return.
Okay.
So, visa-wise. And so we came back and bummed around a little, vainly looking for jobs. I mean, half-hearted attempt. We would, there's no internet, there's no real newspaper advertisements. Like, we were going to bars and like trying to talk to people and say like, can you hire us? It was just like, I think I got one measly interview out of anything I did. We were about to give up and just go back and say, this is done. We did 2 months of this, put in a good fight, and saw an advertisement in the Moscow Times for security guards at the embassy. And that's where we got, so I stayed there for a year doing that, which was perfect. It was the first job I had, paid, $22,000 a year for 1993 Moscow. We were rich.
Right.
And then again, kind of chickened out when I went to grad school because I didn't want to stay there as a security guard forever. But by that I had enough of the bug, because that year of living, as the security guard by day and, running around the city like a madman by night, with all of the crazy things like catching a bus for a taxi, because the guy can make an extra $5 taking you home, or $2.
Yeah.
Women, obviously, just the lawlessness of it was just, kind of exciting. And really, it was just an adventure. The whole adventure. And I mean, not to be ignored, was a true love of the language. I mean, I could get drunk and wake up at 7:00 with a hangover, make coffee, and I'd make flashcards. I have a distinct memory of doing this. Like, I took it seriously. And that was my main driver the entire time, from high school all the way through this security guard gig, that it was just language.
Well, and that's the way you learn it, by hanging out with people, right?
Well, exactly. But also you need that academic part, though. I mean, I think a lot of people, I have that friend that I mentioned who's lived there his whole life, essentially adult life, and his Russian's fine, but he gets by just kind of repeating the same stuff over and over again, to his wife. Well, I think they speak English at home, frankly, but in his business, he's working with Americans. He goes out, he can order his food, but he's actually not that great. Like, you don't get it by osmosis.
Yeah.
You have to still study it. I still do to this day. I mean, and I'm married to a Russian. You'd think I'd be like perfect, but what do we say? What's for dinner? What do you want to do? It's these phrases,
Yeah. So for you, it was just an adventure in a place with little boundaries, but had this allure of the language.
Yes. I didn't.
Did you feel like you were a part of history, or did that matter? Or
no, I did. Once I got in there, I started to realize it. I'm embarrassed to say that I'm not really embarrassed. It's just the way it is. I didn't go over there with a great understanding of what was going on. I mean, despite the high school glasnost perestroika, I did take some classes on Soviet history in college. I majored in kind of Slavic studies, so I certainly picked up a lot of what was going on, but I wasn't like reading the New York Times every day. Like, so I had the basic landscape of like Soviet history and all that stuff. It was the current stuff that I wasn't like seized by. Right. So, my father came up right before I was going to go back to Russia after study abroad. He said, like, you're going back at a kind of tough time. Are you following what's going on here? Yeah. And so I landed in Moscow for that return, none other than October 2nd, 1993, which was right before, I'm sure the White House attack
I landed in Sheremetyevo on that day.
Did
I
you
watched the assault on that building from the TV cameras in Sheremetyevo.
Well, I can one up you on that. I watched the assault from the Arbot. I actually we were crazy enough to walk down there, you know, like go to
Right.
danger. And I mean, I really felt I was in the middle of a, I mean, we were in the middle of a civil war, but I'm talking like gunshots from different directions kind of stuff. Like,
Right.
it was insane to do that, of course. But the point is, I didn't really know that was going on. Like, I mean, I was sure there's some political difficulties, but I wasn't tracking like day by day and who Hezbollah was and what Yeltsin was trying to do. So, you know, the history part, that, you know, that being a part of it certainly kind of took hold as I continued to live. And of course, you know, meeting Russians and, you know, getting deeper and deeper, more deeply embedded in society, so to speak. Certainly when you started, I mean, the real thing that stuck out in terms of the history in the making was the lawlessness over the American Western kind of influence. I mean, that was certainly one thing that you'd be reminded of.
Yeah.
But the lawlessness was something that kind of made more of an impression on me. I mean, like, I think I have more memories of, and this is later, maybe after the first year security guard thing, but like I remember, like, you know, just gangsters all over the place. I mean, it really was like Chicago, you know, in the 20s, as they always say. I mean, I remember a gangster getting out of his car and picking up a road, you know, one of those signs that stops traffic, or like I don't know, what do you call it? They're like triangular things they'll just put in.
Oh, the traffic cones? The cone.
Oh, yeah, not a cone, but they're more like a hobby horse type or whatever.
Yeah.
Picked it up and like just started wailing on this car because, of course, he, you know, the driver did something to piss him off. And in the car was this poor old man, right? So he's probably a, you know, hero of the Soviet Union for all this idiot knows.
Right.
But it was that aggressive kind of like totally like no respect. I don't care about the rules, and I'm just going to do what I want. And that was kind of nuts. Just to see that all the time.
Yeah.
You know,
and I remember those.
I'm sure you do too. Yeah,
I remember those years too, and
right.
You know, and so, but so you weren't part of the real, or were you part of the expat community? Would you say you were part of that?
In terms of like hanging out with the
the Hungry Duck, and you know.
Yeah, this group, I mean, not in the sense of, it was kind of like a repeat of high school. It was like, I know there's something bigger that I'm not really totally integrated into. In terms of, you know, we had a small group of like 4 friends, and we would bounce around together. And
Americans.
What's
Americans.
that? Americans, 4 Americans, like 4 or 5. It depended on who came and went from the security guard gig.
Yeah.
We go to casinos together, and underground casinos in like the bottom of an apartment building and kind of stuff like that. And, you know, the bars, whatever, of which there were, by the way, not that many at that time. I mean, there was like a couple of them.
Right.
You know, but so that I have fuzzier awareness of that. I mean, that was 1 year in my life, the security guard gig. And it was just these four kids, and we were bouncing around town, going to McDonald's, going to bars. It was really more when I came back in 97 through 2004.
Yeah.
That was my whole, I mean, I just didn't move from there. I mean, that was my life, 97 to 2004, where, you know, I reconnected with some of these friends, the ones that had remained, but more focused on work and soon family at that point. And I definitely did, you know, sense when I would, let's say, go out with one friend and see him at a bar and kind of walking through, hey, Joe, hey, George, hey, come on over, let me meet my friend Steve. And I'm thinking, like, I don't have this huge group of expat dudes that I hang out with. And again, it felt a little like high school, because it just, that's who I was. I didn't do that very well.
Right. Right.
But, you know, in a way, I didn't care. And like the same thing I was telling you at the little preamble, I was happy And I had the Russian friend still, and soon a Russian wife, and her friends, and my own Russian friends, and a few American friends, and it was just a continuation of what I got today. It was like, 6 or 7 here and there.
Right. So, but what did you do in the interim period when you left and before you came back?
Oh, I went to grad school at George Washington University.
Oh, okay.
That was another escape. Like, I can't be a security guard forever. This is getting old. I'm going to go to grad school and see if that'll change things for me. And it did, in fact, because from that, even though it was an expensive way to find out what an NGO was, for better or for worse, that's what propelled me into working for IREX, because it was just the people you meet in grad school, hanging around the career office and all that stuff, and when I got out of GW in '97, and by the way, in '96 I went back over for the summer, and this is actually the most expat-y I got in '96, in between. And this also speaks to the magnetic kind of pull of going back there, because even though I had returned and had done a year of study, I said, the summer in between these 2 years of master's degree, I'm going back to Russia come hell or high water. And I myself, researched like what program could possibly send me there, and found this small international affairs program that, for extra money, of course, would, maybe have like 15 people in it. And so for the summer, I studied, some kind of half-assed classes they put together for us. It was a little bit of a boondoggly academic experience, but interned at the American Chamber of Commerce. Which was very cool, because then I saw embassy officials coming for meetings. I helped put together the 4th of July celebration thing. It was an internship. It wasn't that great. Met some of your Russian tech people that you were talking to who were working on the website and things like that. And and by the way, that summer program is kind of weird as it was. The guy who ran it was some ex-KGB guy and had all sorts of connections, and he would bring in these speakers every week that included like Irina Khakhamada, Ligachov showed up, one of the coup plotters of the Gorbachev coup, as guest speaker, Zhirinovsky. And we went to Zyuganov's office in the Duma and sat in his office, like at his conference table, and one after another.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
that's pretty amazing.
It was very amazing. It was.
Yeah.
And so again, that was just the summer of like, hey, I got to get back there. But when I graduated, it was almost just as immediate, because I got this job at IREX doing, working on American scholars that wanted to go over there to study, because the archives had now opened up, and there was lots of funding for research there.
Right. And who funds IREX?
Mostly, well, back then, IREX was a little different back then than it is now. They're way more international in scope. Like then, they were really just former Soviet Union.
Okay.
But the funding is pretty much limited still, I think, to the State Department and USAID. Okay. So it's just civil society development programs, media, academic exchanges, this kind of thing.
Okay.
But the interesting thing there was that even though I was a total newbie in the professional world, I mean, I didn't, put on a tie for the first time. It was that kind of first shocking, like, come to the office and kind of try to work, and and I was 27. I was like, I tell my son all the time, like, do not worry, you're 22. It's okay if you feel like a total moron, because you basically are. Yeah. Knowing how I felt then at 27, I still felt like an idiot. But they had this crisis of the organization, so to speak, in that their Vladivostok office had lost its director. And that was a pretty important hub, because they were this program, Business for Russia, which they were coming around to recruiting for this program in the Far East. that was in their grant proposal. They had to deliver on all these that program fed a lot of people. I mean,
and that was a USAID funded program.
That was USIA, International Agency. I'm sorry, Information Agency, U.S. Information.
Okay.
They've now, the USIA was kind of like the propaganda agency of the U.S., but they've now come into the State Department as a bureau. They kind of disappeared. Jesse Helms back then made that happen.
I see.
And so, but they were recruiting, these businessmen, as you did the interviews.
Yeah.
They had no director. So the vice president of IREX was like, I got to get someone out there like yesterday to start to work on this thing. And he kind of talked to me, and he's like, look, Russian. He probably was not overly impressed by my, presence there as this, kid who could barely shave still or something.
Right.
But he had no choice, essentially. He's like, everyone else has, he didn't say this to me, but other people have their wives, their girlfriends, they don't want to leave. I was like, get me the hell out of here. I'll go back there in a second.
Right. Had you been to Vladivostok before?
Never.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that goes back. I mean, that's the weird thing about me, is that as kind of timid as I am in some ways, the Russia thing kind of stripped that of me, and I said, I'll go, I'll do anything.
Yeah.
I mean, because, I went to Moscow, again, on this trip that IREX was sending me on for 2 days. And then they put me on a plane to Vladivostok with,
after 2 days on the job in Moscow.
It was like a meager, maybe it was a week, I don't want to exaggerate, but it was a blip. It was like, here's the program, here's what you do, go.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an office there, so I had support. There was Russian staff that could kind of train me up, and email was now a part of work. So
yeah,
it wasn't that crazy. But all I'm saying is that I wasn't bumming around Moscow getting all prepared for it. I mean, I basically hopped through Moscow to Vladivostok, and within weeks, really, because it was October, November, December that I made my arrival in October, and then it was this recruitment period was October through December, essentially, where I suddenly was, just like you saw in Yaroslavl, living on Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, on the island, and Khabarovsk, and Vladivostok. Like those three, I would just cycle around, train, plane, and live there. Like, rent apartments or hotels, and then try to interview local businessmen, government officials, the whole deal, with, by now pretty damn good Russian, at least for a young guy.
Right.
And then, of course, that just spurred all of these mini local adventures, because, someone would befriend me and take me out to the bar and this and that. And, of course, they all wanted a little trip to America if they could get it, too. So it was just glomming onto me like, let's hang out with this guy. Yeah.
So I'd almost forgotten that I had done interviews for you. So you reminded me. So just for the sake of all this, can you just kind of go over what was the point of the purpose of Business for Russia, and how hard was it to recruit those people? And what did they expect? What did you expect? Could you just talk more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. I mean, it was the great love of my life at the time, and still, obviously I have fond memories of it. There were two aspects to this program, actually. One was business for Russia, and the other one was called Community Connections. There were two different ones, but they were under the same rubric of these short-term exchanges. So one model of exchange is like the Fulbright. It's not really an exchange. It's kind of a one-way. I mean, the exchange is the wrong word. But, one is like send somebody to grad school for 2 years. Another one is like send someone for 4 months. These programs were send someone for like 2 weeks to a month. So it was very much on like the numbers of like throw as many as we can and something's going to stick. I mean, at least that's the way I interpret it. Plus, frankly, it's not the funding only goes so far. So are you going to pick 10 businessmen for a year to intern in Silicon Valley or wherever you can be, or 1,000 entrepreneurs? And so essentially, I'm not answering the question, of course, but essentially for the Business for Russia, we had to find young, well, not young, but they usually were, entrepreneurs who spoke English well enough to live in America for about 4 to 5 weeks with a host family, and intern in a business that kind of corresponded with what they were interested in. So if I met someone who was making signs, I remember this actually distinctly. Someone was now making signs, put it in a storefront, fresh bagels, whatever you want to sell. We had this application. Everyone turned in their applications. We had an application deadline. They would come by my little office. And then I would call them up for interviews. And that's when you would come in. We'd have the panel of like Americans and Russians. And, Irina, of course, is an alumna of the program from way back when. And we'd interview them and basically try to assess their language. Could they survive basically in America?
Right.
Under, of course, supervision of everybody. And, did they have goals for the program, or were they just trying to put one past us? But it was, it was such a quick thing. Like, we had to recruit, let's say in Yaroslav or Khabarovsk or Vladivostok or whatever, roughly 20 to 30 finalists for this program. Participants, not finalists, participants. Within, 2 months, like my arrival and then my departure from that city started with me knowing nothing about the city, them knowing nothing about the program, and me. So I'd advertise in newspapers, sometimes do TV spots, try to get on the local news, interviews, spread the word, right? Yeah. Develop contacts in, like, let's say the government to then, help me recruit for this. We do press conferences, the whole thing. And then it would culminate in interviews that we would do. And by the time I left 2 months later, we'd have, let's say, hopefully 20 to 30 candidates that I would then, feed into the, IREX. They would figure out what to do with them later. I'd move on to the next city and keep the whole show going.
So how many people per cycle, or what was a cycle? So
a cycle was, and by the way, before I answer that, I'll just quickly, the community connections part was different. It was same kind of model of a group of 10 people, but they're more thematically focused on, let's say, NGO development, public spaces, let's say, was one thing, or criminal justice reform, or business development, and things like that, but not like the entrepreneurs or the other thing. It would be government people who were working on this topic. Right. Local leaders that were active in that topic. Right. And so that was more intense because we were, we had to like kind of document through our own, I'm talking about on the behalf of IREX, that these people were worth something. Because they were spinning whatever story, and they were good. They weren't like lying to us, but certainly a few stinkers got by that they had to like send home because they didn't know, they weren't participating. They didn't know what was going on. But overall, we'd send these groups of 10. Oh, public health was another one. So I'd send like doctors, like the ones who ran the hospitals, And I mean, everyone was more or less kind of the bigwig category. To make it the idea was a cohesive group of 10 that from one community that would go to another community, let's say Cincinnati, to be given a 2-week tour of like the local hospital, the local public health, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Or it could be education. They go to schools, and it was kind of a nice model. I mean, they'd supposedly be bonding as a group, shared experience, and learning from the American way of doing it. And going back and presumably applying maybe something that could be applied to their own local, endeavors. So in terms of the cycle, it was like I did Yaroslavl and Vologda, I think, simultaneously, 2 months. I would go a week in Yaroslav, Vologda, back to Yaroslav, Vologda. And just like seriously, for 2 months, it was like bing, 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 with nary a visit to Moscow in between. It was just 1 week on, 1 week off, 1 week on. And then I'd take a break back in Moscow, go to now Ivanova and Kostroma, and did those. And then I went to Izhevsk and Orenburg. And I started, of course, with Khabarovsk and Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, but based in Vladivostok. And so I did 8 of these communities in the span of basically a calendar year plus, plus a month.
Okay.
So it was crazy. I mean, in terms of, and you're talking again to the kid who could barely turn the computer on after grad school I could from grad school. I knew how to work a computer, but, I didn't. Yeah. Professionally speaking, was very lacking, but thrown into this like you're on your own, buddy, kind of mode, and then feeling this sense of fulfillment because I'm like the nerdy kid from high school who never was popular, suddenly being alone in these cities and hanging out with like the deputy mayor.
Yeah.
Selling this program. So it was just like, wow, like how did that happen? And I was doing it,
So it was a kind of a validation.
That was what I was looking for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super validation, super proud of myself. Let me just show you one thing. I just spotted this. I forgot about this. I don't know if you can see it, and it's nothing great, but this would just get me high, like on TV.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's focusing.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
28 years old, being interviewed by the local press like I was some local celebrity. So there was a little bit of the ego thing too, that like I feel popular and people want to talk to me, and I won't deny it. And also, I'm not gonna. It can't be boiled down to all one phrase like I want to affect change in Russia. I mean, honestly, that was like the third in line for me. I mean, I did believe in the programs, but I wanted to be independent, make money, enjoy life in Russia.
Yeah. I
wasn't overly sold on the whole thing about Western society, changing the life. I mean, I bought enough of it to be able to pass it on to those that wanted to listen, but for me, I mean, it was frankly a job that I loved rather than like a mission that I felt.
Right. You weren't a missionary for any particular institutional building or something.
Not like that. I mean, there was some definitely USAID people that I'd met. Now, this is where we get into a little bit of the expat kind of thing. I mean, certainly as I continued, and by the way, this goes from 1997 to the end of 98 was this program I described, but I moved on to a program in 99, 2000 throughout the whole former Soviet Union, advising education like centers on how our centers we had established. We still have them actually. These little hubs in Tashkent, in Belarus, everywhere that were providing information to locals on how to apply to Western universities for how to get scholarships. And my job was to coordinate all of this. So for the 2 years after the program I just described, I was running around not only in Russia, but now to all of these countries, giving workshops and training and all that stuff. After that, I was running the Business for Russia programs, and I was managing all the guys who were doing all the travel.
Right.
And then after that, I was like USAID, kind of anti-trafficking programs and other things like that, as I became more of a kind of like a manager in IREX and whatnot. And now I had a family, so I was not as interested in all the travel anyways. So throughout the course of that, I certainly did connect more or less with if at first I thought it was all like oil and gas people in Russia, the kind of milieu that I found myself in at that point was definitely more of the Peace Corps type of people. I've come over here to, change the world and things like that. Because, we'd hire people like I was in 97, 98. Now I'm doing the hiring in 2002, 2003. and they're all kind of coming in and out, like they do a year, then they quit and that kind of thing. And so I certainly saw a lot of these people who wanted to have a piece of the adventure, but many of them who were also, kind of, I want to do some good in the world and all that. So, I was just more inclined, not necessarily by an interest in that group or by design, but just by the people that were around me, to be socializing with those types in the bars or in the restaurants or whatever.
Right.
Or at someone's house, they would all be of like, I work for USAID, I work for this one, I work for Project Harmony, I work for that. They're all these NGO types.
Right.
And then you go out and you see these like bankers hanging out, and they were the ones that maybe I thought I would have been going towards in '93, but here I am in this whole other camp.
Yeah. So, so how long did Business for Russia as a program? When did it start and when did it end? Do you know?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
It started in around 1994.
Yeah.
Or 95. And I say that because by the time I had gotten there, I remember kind of a certain footprint this program had, and some like material that dated back, a couple of years. It wasn't just like I was the pioneer of it or something.
Right.
And it lasted long enough for me to continue working on it as a director of it in Moscow, that is. And they did this, by the way, in Ukraine. They had Community Connections kind of blossomed, and they did a Ukrainian version of it. They didn't call it Business for Russia, but they did the whole, Community Connections aspect of the NGO and the education and public health groups and some entrepreneurs as well. And so it had more of a reach than in Russia itself. And then I think it fizzled out around, and these decisions are made by some assistant secretary somewhere in the United States. It wasn't by any, it's not working or something else. It's just priorities shifted, and eventually I think they transferred the Community Connections program to USAID to manage, and in the process, the Business for Russia piece just kind of fell apart. Maybe in 2004 or 5 or something like that. So it had like a 10-year run, probably.
Yeah. And so how many people a year participated in it?
I happen to remember actually very well, because when I was the director of it, I was looking at all the, the scheduling and the staff and all that stuff. And there were about, under my, directorship, so to speak, I think we were going about 800 to 850 a year.
Wow.
Yeah. And now, before we put that in the book or something, let me just do a quick math check. So there were about each. So I did. Let's say you had 6 communities. This will be quick.
Yeah.
One person would do a year, let's say, and maybe get 30 people. So that's 180. I'm saying in each.
Right.
Let's round it up to 200. And there were about 4 of these court. Actually, that works out quite well. I think it was about 800.
Yeah.
It may have gone up and down a little bit.
Right.
And in some of them, frankly, we got more. I mean, some of them we get 30 or 40. From 95 to 05, let's call it a decade, I don't think I would necessarily say there are 8,000 people. It might have started out slowly, and it might have kind of gone down towards the end. But
yeah.
But they're out there. They're Business for Russia alumni, and Irina is one of them, who still remember the program. Right.
Well, no, I've run into other people in Yaroslavl, some of whom no longer speak English. I'm losing my Russian very rapidly, but they fondly remember that program because they would talk to me about it. I mean, there are business people there. They run a restaurant or they run a printing shop or, a small business usually, but pretty comfortable. And they remember that program, Yeah.
No, I know. I mean, I went to Yaroslavl when I was at the embassy. And also when I was at the embassy, of course, in Moscow, going to these receptions and stuff, you'd meet people, and I would meet alumni, not only of that program, but of others as well. And, you learn that it's that you can have, and I was telling somebody about this the other day. There was another example of it, but it was a friend of mine. We were reminiscing, and I was like, if your life is generally fairly monotonous for the most part, and then when you insert a week event that is just totally different from the other weeks that you've had, it sears itself into your memory banks.
Yeah.
So independent of like how influential the program was or whatever, it still is the experience itself, the very fact that it transpired.
Yeah.
I think people just cling to that. Like, I remember I went to Cincinnati in '96 and it was freaking awesome,
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of alumni are reacting to. I mean, they're just like, oh my God, it was crazy. Just like when I showed up in Russia, taking the bus to Moscow State University, totally scared.
Yeah.
That's the memory I remember, not another bus ride I took,
Right. So, do you know, are there any reports or evaluations of business for Russia that exist somewhere in the State Department or USIA or anywhere that would summarize this program and what came of it?
For business for Russia, well, first of all, I could almost guarantee you on some shared drive somewhere in the kind of digital bowels of the State Department, there's definitely stuff on this program. I mean, I know some of the people that were my kind of controllers, so to speak, from the government,
right?
That are still there.
Yeah.
We still will talk about this program when we run into each other. In terms of like a formal valuation, I'm not sure. The government, in my view, and we still talk about this here in 2021, is we're not doing enough to evaluate our programs. I mean, it's so much easier to pass them off to some NGO to manage, this IREX or somebody else, and then just make it happen, move on to the next problem, but not like maybe reflecting on did that work or did that not work. And every once in a while, they will do a deep dive evaluation of like ECA. Now, ECA is called the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. Like, they are the bureau version of the information agency that was once an independent agency, and now it's a bureau of the State Department. And every once in a while, they'll do a deep dive and try to assess like how successful it was, and they talk with alumni and they figure this all out. And I don't know if any such evaluation was ever done. But I'd be happy to. I mean, if this is of real interest, I mean, I don't mind reaching out.
I just think it's a really interesting program, and look, when I Google it, it doesn't show up anywhere. I can't find it. I mean, it's as if it didn't exist.
I know.
But 850 people a year and who came to the U.S. formed some opinion about this country is pretty significant, particularly in light of how separated we are now. That there was that level of opportunity, because obviously they went home and talked to everybody they knew about what that experience was.
Right.
There's a multiplier effect. From having done that, anyway, so if there were such a thing, I would love to be able to, find it.
I mean, I would be interested too. I mean, if I had, now that you've sparked the return of this program to me, I will, I don't mind, pinging a few people that are still hanging about and seeing if they can.
Okay.
All I have to do is go into a folder and say, oh yeah, we have all those evaluations over here. I mean,
yeah,
it's really no big deal. But just to keep in mind, though, I mean, ECA, that is the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs, they're still doing variants of this and have been throughout the world. The most maybe proximate to Business for Russia in a sense, or at least the community connections kind of version of it, is the International Visitors and Leadership Program.
Yeah.
And they also send over groups of 10, 12, whatever, for about a week, 10 days, maybe sometimes 2 weeks, in the, tens of thousands almost. I mean, I don't know how each year, but I mean, so, Russia, even though that program disappeared, there have been plenty of other ones that continue that spirit of, just bringing you over, show you the thing, and send you back home.
But not from Russia.
Well, no, but I mean, no, there are other ones like the young, maybe young legislative, the Legislative Fellows Program. That was, that's small, but I managed that at the embassy, believe it or not, just 5 years ago.
Really?
Now that was just a group of like 10 or something that would go over to look at legislative affairs, but these were people who were actually like, involved in the Duma and things like that. So a little bit of a higher level people. Of course, you had the Mackey program, which was graduate study.
Right.
Fulbrighters. So, there's that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the big one, which the Russians put the kibosh on when I was at the embassy, was the Future Leaders Exchange Program. Now, that's huge.
Yeah.
If you're looking at these programs, that's the big one called Flex, FLEX. That's high school, high school study for youth from Russia and other countries to be in the high school. I mean, these guys would come back like basically half American after a year when they were 16 or 17.
Yeah.
In high school, and half of the embassy is filled with alumni of these programs. I mean, with little exaggeration, at least maybe 25%.
Yeah.
The head of Russia Today, RT, is a Flex alumna. It didn't go to good use with her, but
right.
I mean, they learn America big time, learn English perfectly, and so Business for Russia is one of many of these kinds of programs. So the fact that it came and disappeared, to the government, it was just like moving pieces around. Like, let's put money here, let's put money in this country, let's move. Then let's go to Ukraine. During the Orange Revolution, Ukraine funding exploded, so they take it from Russia. And then after Maidan, more money to Ukraine. Yeah. Or some other country. And frankly, with going back to my narrative just a little bit, when I was at the embassy in 2003, I think, at a meeting with USAID to discuss, roundtable kind of all the local NGOs, one of the USAID people came in and said that Khodorkovsky was just arrested at this airport, maybe in Siberia somewhere. And it was kind of a chill in the room because there were several, leading NGO people, not the little dipshits that I was back in the day, but Lyudmila Alexeyeva, the human rights activist from she would attend these meetings. And so it was kind of a more of a bigwig scene of the NGO community, as much of a bigwig scene as that can be. But and that was it. There was a chill in the room, and I remember. I mean, in a movie, I would over dramatize this, and it's never as dramatic as it seems in your memory. But I do remember thinking, shit, this might not, because just 3-4 months before that, IREX was working with Khodorkovsky's NGO to try to build, let's do programs with him. We're not doing programs with the government. We can even do it. How exciting is that society has evolved, that we can get into corporate cooperation with this NGO. It seemed like the pinnacle of what we had been working towards. Right. The fact that we can do it as an independent foundation with another independent foundation, almost independent of government work. And then it all came crashing down, frankly, when he was arrested, because it was that's the writing on the wall right there. Right, right. And then, that coupled with, Putin appointing governors versus electing them, and with my own personal situation, my son was about to get into kindergarten. I was like, let's get the fuck out of here because it's going south. and I got to raise a family now. And so I skedaddled, but it was fairly prescient in a way because all of the, forgetting about where society went with Putin and everything else,
Right.
these programs just took a mad dash for other countries. And you know, IREX became, from the bustling office of maybe as many of it as a 70 employees, maybe at one point, was reduced to like 5 or 6.
And this was right after Khodorkovsky was arrested?
Well, it was a
in that area.
I'm saying when I pulled out in May of 2004,
Okay.
and what I'm saying is programs were kind of shutting down. It felt a little bit like the movie where the guy is running across the bridge as the bridge is collapsing behind him, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, what I'm saying is by the time I came back to the U.S., when I, you know, still be in touch with people, it was like, oh yeah, IREX, because I was working for IREX in the U.S. for another 3 years.
Ah, okay.
From 2004 in the Washington office.
Right.
It was a gradual, we're not doing that program anymore and that kind of thing. And you just kind of saw like, we had to shut down Vladivostok. We shut down, I mean, we had offices in Irkutsk, Vladivostok, Novosibirsk, and Moscow, and maybe Petersburg. We had some representative, at least in Petersburg. And it was all just, you know, Moscow, 15 people at some point, and then 10, and then 5. So the NGO kind of, the love over there definitely dissipated. Peace Corps was kicked out, I believe, while I was still there, 2003 maybe, if you wanted to check that. But that's a big sign that, like, we don't want you here, you know?
Right, right. Right. Well, I'm just making a note to myself because, so this was and did IREX shut down completely?
Oh no, IREX as an organization is still going strong.
No, I mean in Moscow.
Yes, they did. They, when I was there at the embassy, so I, you know, this is of course many years after I left the organization in 2008.
Yeah.
I arrived at the embassy in 2012 as now a government employee.
Okay. So what were you in 2012 when you went back?
So in 2008 I joined the State Department. Left IREX, joined the State Department.
Okay.
And then in 2012, by a fluke, I got an opportunity to go work as essentially a diplomat in the embassy.
Uh-huh.
I was basically, for all intents and purposes, taking the place of filling a vacancy that a diplomat vacated.
Yeah.
They didn't have any time to train anyone up for it because there's always a language preparation for it. Right. So they pulled me out because I already had the language and stuck me in there. And so I became an assistant cultural affairs officer, just kind of, you know, like any other diplomat.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think IREX was seriously like 4 people or something.
Yeah.
And it was just like a little piddly program. And they didn't have essentially they kept it afloat basically because the director was, you know, an old, longtime employee like myself. Like, you know, they kind of just kept it on fumes for as long as they could. And eventually they're just like, let's get out of here.
Yeah. 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 And so how long were you in that temporary appointment in the embassy?
2.5 years.
Wow. Okay. And your family moved back with you?
Oh, yeah. No, this was like, you know, when the State Department, which was an eye-opener for me, when they move the diplomats around the globe, they ain't messing around. I mean, they pack up your house, put some of it in storage, and give you the rest if you want it, you know?
Yeah.
Move your car over there. Put your kids in private schools, which happened to be right, you know, in the little townhouse community that they also put me in for God knows how much money.
Yeah.
That's your true expat experience. I mean, there was like Pepsi Cola, you know, Deere Tractor Company.
Where was this? Where was this?
The metro is Tushinskaya in Moscow.
Right.
It's a community.
It wasn't like
Pokrovsky Hills is what it's called. It's basically like have you ever been there?
Yes, I've been there to visit a guy who was a executive for TNKBP.
There you go. See, that's
Yes.
what I mean.
Yeah.
And that was your first kind of, that's where if you wanted to get expat, that's where it was.
But you know that place was initially built by an American entrepreneur from Boston.
Really?
Who was relieved of his ownership at one point.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like we got this. We got it. We'll take it from here.
Yes. Yeah. You have a new partner, and I think it's time for you to go home.
Right.
So